The sonar pinged once, then twice. Captain William "Iron Hand" Carter stood frozen at the control panel, his weathered hands gripping the edge so hard his knuckles turned white. 300 meters below the surface of the Barents Sea, in the pitch-black cold of 1968, something was very wrong. "Skipper, you seeing this?" Lieutenant Marcus Webb's voice cracked slightly. The young officer pointed at the depth gauge. The needle was trembling. Carter didn't respond immediately. He was listening. In 30 years of submarine service, he'd learned that steel had a language. Every creak, every groan, every whisper of metal under pressure told a story. But this sound was different. This sound was rhythmic, like breathing. "Cut the engines," Carter ordered quietly. All stop. The USS Scorpion fell silent. The hum of machinery died away, leaving only the subtle sounds of the deep, the distant groaning of ice above, the occasional ping of the sonar, and that other sound, that impossible sound. Webb moved closer to Carter. "Sir, the hull integrity is solid. No breaches, no stress fractures, but the sonar keeps picking up movement in Section 4. Section 4. The aft torpedo room." Carter felt his jaw tighten. That section had been sealed off 2 days ago after Seaman Rodriguez reported seeing condensation forming patterns on the bulkhead. Patterns that looked like handprints. "How many men did we lose on this route in '52? Carter asked suddenly. Webb blinked. "Sir, the K-19 incident. Soviet submarine. Reactor leak. Right here in these waters. How many?" I don't know the exact number, sir. But I heard it was bad. Real bad." Carter nodded slowly. He'd been a young lieutenant then, running depth-charge drills in the Atlantic. The official report said the K-19 limped back to port. The unofficial report, the one whispered in officer clubs after too many drinks, said something else entirely. It said some of the crew were so irradiated they were buried in lead coffins. It said the submarine itself was so contaminated it should have been scuttled. It said the K-19 was still down here somewhere, leaking radiation into the cold, dark water. "Get me a radiation reading," Carter said. "Full spectrum." "Aye, sir." Webb hurried to the monitoring station. Carter walked slowly toward Section 4. The corridor was narrow, lit by dim red emergency lights. His boots echoed on the metal floor. Behind him, he could hear the nervous chatter of the crew, the clicking of instruments, the eternal drip, drip, drip of condensation, and underneath it all, that breathing sound. He reached the sealed hatch. A handwritten sign hung on it. "Restricted. Captain's orders." Carter had written it himself with a shaking hand. He'd told the crew it was a minor coolant leak, nothing to worry about. They'd fix it at port. He'd lied. The truth was, he didn't know what was in there, and that terrified him more than any enemy torpedo ever could. Carter pressed his ear against the cold. Steel hatch. The sound was clearer here. In out, like lungs, like something massive and alive, drawing breath through the very bones of his ship. "Captain?" It was Webb, jogging up behind him. "Radiation readings they're elevated, sir. Not dangerous yet, but definitely higher than background. And, sir, there's something else." "Go on." "The readings are fluctuating, in a pattern. Every 12 seconds they spike, then drop, then spike again. Every 12 seconds. The same interval as the breathing sound." Carter's mind raced. Radiation didn't behave like that. Physics didn't work like that. Unless... "What's our exact position?" he demanded. Webb pulled out a navigation chart. "Approximately 71 degrees north, 43 degrees east. We're about 15 nautical miles from..." He stopped. His face went pale. "From what, Lieutenant?" "From the last known position of the K-19, sir." The lights flickered. Both men looked up. In the dim red glow, they could see their breath misting in front of their faces. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees in the last minute. "That's impossible," Webb whispered. "The heating system is..." A sound cut him off, a long, metallic groan that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, as if the entire submarine was shifting, settling, breathing. Carter grabbed the intercom. "All hands, this is the captain. Battle stations. I want a full systems check in every section, and somebody get me Chief Engineer Morrison. Now." The alarm began to wail. Red lights spun. Men ran to their posts with practiced efficiency, but Carter could see the fear in their eyes. They'd all heard the stories. Every submariner had. Tales of ghost ships and cursed waters, of crews that went down and never truly died, their spirits trapped forever in steel tombs beneath the waves. Morrison arrived within 2 minutes, wiping grease from his hands. He was a bear of a man, 50 years old, with a gray beard and eyes that had seen 3 wars. "You bellowed, Skipper?" The breathing sound. "What's causing it?" Morrison's expression grew serious. "I've been checking that. It's not mechanical. It's not the hull settling. It's—" He hesitated. "Spit it out, Chief." "It's like something's pushing against the hull from outside. Rhythmically, with force, but sonar shows nothing out there. Just empty water." Empty water. Carter thought about the K-19 lying somewhere below them in the dark. Thought about men dying slowly from radiation, their bodies breaking down, their minds fragmenting. Thought about what might happen if a crew went mad down here. If they died hating and angry and afraid. Could hatred survive death? Could it seep into metal and water and time itself? "I want a full sweep with the active sonar," Carter ordered. "Maximum range. Find me that wreck." "Sir, going active will give away our position. If there are Soviet—" "Do it!" Morrison nodded and hurried away. Webb stayed close to Carter, his hand unconsciously resting on his sidearm. "Sir, what are we looking for?" Carter didn't answer. He was watching the sealed hatch to Section 4. The metal was covered in condensation now, dripping steadily onto the floor, and in the moisture he could see shapes forming. Not random patterns, not tricks of light, hand prints. Dozens of them. Small ones, large ones, clustered together as if people were pressed against the other side of the door, trying to get out, or trying to get in. The sonar tech's voice crackled over the intercom. "Captain, we've got something. Bearing 270, depth 400 meters. It's— Jesus Christ, it's big." Carter ran back to the control room, Webb close behind. The sonar screen showed a massive shape on the ocean floor, too big to be a submarine. It looked more like a small island, a mound of twisted metal and sediment. "That's not the K-19, Webb said. "That's too large." But Carter knew better. He'd seen salvage photos from other wrecks. When a submarine imploded at depth, when it hit the bottom with tremendous force, the metal didn't stay in one piece. It spread. It shattered. It created a debris field that could stretch for hundreds of meters. And if the reactor was still hot, if it was still leaking— "Get me a sample of the water," Carter ordered. "I need to know what we're breathing." The breathing sound grew louder. The entire crew could hear it now. Some of the younger sailors were praying. Others stood rigid at their posts, trying to ignore the impossible thing happening around them. Carter felt a cold hand grip his heart. In all his years at sea, he'd faced enemy fire, depth charges, equipment failures. He'd once kept a crippled submarine afloat for 48 hours through sheer force of will. But this was different. This was beyond training, beyond experience. This was something that shouldn't exist. Morrison returned with a vial of water. His face was grim. "Captain, this isn't good. The radiation in this sample is off the charts. Whatever's down there, it's hot, real hot. How long until it affects the crew? We're already being affected. Those elevated readings Webb reported, they're getting worse. If we stay here another 6 hours—" Morrison didn't finish the sentence. Carter understood. Radiation poisoning, hair loss, nausea, internal bleeding, death. But something else worried him more. The handprints on the hatch had multiplied. They now covered the entire door, overlapping, desperate, and the breathing sound had changed. It was faster now, urgent, excited. "Sir," the sonar tech again, "the wreck is moving." "That's impossible. I'm telling you what I see. The shape it's rising, slowly, but it's definitely rising." Carter stared at the screen. The tech was right. The massive mound of debris was lifting off the ocean floor, shedding sediment and metal fragments. And as it rose, the radiation reading spiked, dramatically. "Dive! Take us deeper!" Carter shouted. "Emergency dive! Now!" The Scorpion's nose tipped downward. The depth gauge needle spun. 350 meters, 400, 450. 50. But the thing below them was still rising, and it was fast. Webb grabbed Carter's arm. "Sir, we can't go much deeper. The hull will—" The impact came without warning, a massive blow to the underside of the submarine that sent men flying. Lights exploded, glass shattered. The Scorpion shuddered like a wounded animal. And then, silence. Carter pulled himself up, blood running from a cut on his forehead. Around him, the crew was doing the same, checking for injuries, trying to make sense of what just happened. "Damage report," Carter barked. Morrison's voice came over the intercom, strained. "Hull breach in Section 7. We're flooding. And Captain, Section 4 is open." "What?" "The sealed hatch. It's open. The lock must have failed in the impact." Carter's blood ran cold. He grabbed a flashlight and ran toward Section 4, ignoring Webb's protests. The corridor was flooded with freezing water up to his knees. The cold was so intense it burned. He reached the open hatch and shone his light inside. The aft torpedo room was empty. The weapons were still in their racks. The equipment was undamaged. But the air was wrong. It was thick, heavy, hard to breathe. And it smelled of copper and ash and something else. Something organic and rotten. On the far wall, written in what looked like frost, were words in Russian. "Mavsa ist zdes." Carter didn't speak Russian, but he knew someone who did. He keyed his radio. "Webb, get me a translation. Russian words, they say MY-VSYO. Webb's voice came back quickly, trembling. "Sir, it says we are still here." The breathing sound stopped. In the sudden silence, Carter heard something else. Footsteps. Wet, heavy footsteps. Coming from behind him. He turned slowly, raising his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the flooded corridor. For a moment he saw nothing, just water and shadow. Then they appeared. Figures, dozens of them, standing in the water, motionless. They wore Soviet naval uniforms, but the fabric was rotted, falling apart. Their skin was gray and blistered. Their eyes were empty holes that somehow still saw, and they were looking at him. Carter didn't move, couldn't move. His training, his experience, his entire understanding of reality had just shattered. These things shouldn't exist. Dead men don't walk. Physics doesn't allow it. But here they were. The figure closest to him opened its mouth. No sound came out, but Carter understood. He understood in a way that bypassed language, that spoke directly to some primal part of his brain. They wanted out. They'd been trapped down here for 16 years, poisoned by radiation, driven mad by isolation and pain. They died angry, they died afraid, and somehow, impossibly, they'd remained. Tethered to their tomb by rage and desperation, until now, until another submarine came close enough for them to reach, to touch, to infect. "Captain," Webb's voice on the radio panicked. "The crew is reporting. They're seeing things, people who aren't there, shadows moving. Sir, what's happening?" Carter finally found his voice. "Blow all ballast. Surface, now. Get us out of here." "We can't surface. We're in Soviet waters. If they detect us, I don't care. Blow the ballast." The submarine lurched. Carter was thrown against the wall as the Scorpion began its emergency ascent. The figures in the water didn't react. They just stood there, watching him with those empty eyes. As the submarine rose, they faded, like mist in sunlight, like dreams at dawn. Within seconds, they were gone, leaving only freezing water and the smell of death. But Carter knew. He knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't over. The K-19 was still down there, still leaking, still poisoning the water with radiation and rage. And whatever had infected his ship, whatever presence or force or impossibility he'd just witnessed, it was now inside the Scorpion. In the metal, in the water, in the air they breathed. The submarine broke the surface under gray Arctic skies. Alarms were still wailing. Men were still praying. Morrison was shouting damage reports that Carter barely heard, because he was staring at the bulkhead wall beside him, watching the condensation form, watching it drip and pool and shape itself into letters. Russian letters. "Ma s vami teper." We are with you now. Carter closed his eyes. He needed to think, needed to plan. The nearest NATO base was in Norway, 3 days away at best speed. 3 days with whatever had come aboard. 3 days watching his crew slowly realize they weren't alone. "Captain." Morrison appeared beside him, his face pale. "We've got a problem in engineering." "What now?" "The men are seeing things. A fourth engineer, Soviet uniform, working on the reactor, but when they approach him, he vanishes." "It's the radiation," Carter said, trying to convince himself. "Hallucinations, that's all." Morrison grabbed his arm, his grip tight. "Captain, I saw him too." And he left handprints on the reactor chamber door. From the inside, the temperature in there is 400 degrees. Nothing living could survive that. Nothing living. Carter felt the weight of those words settle over him. He looked around the control room at his crew. Good men, loyal men, men who trusted him to keep them safe, and he'd led them into hell. "Get everyone who can be spared into the mess hall," Carter ordered. "I need to address the crew." "Sir, what are you going to tell them?" "The truth, or as much of it as I understand." 10 minutes later, 30 men crowded into the small mess hall. Their faces were drawn, exhausted. Some had visible signs of radiation exposure already beginning: bloodshot eyes, pale skin, trembling hands. Carter stood before them, still in his wet uniform, blood dried on his forehead. He looked at each man in turn, memorizing their faces, wondering which of them would make it home. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "I'm not going to insult your intelligence by pretending everything is normal. You've all seen things, heard things, things that shouldn't be possible." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "We are currently 17 nautical miles from the wreck of the Soviet submarine K-19. In 1962, that vessel suffered a catastrophic reactor failure. 22 men died horrible deaths from radiation poisoning. The boat itself was abandoned and scuttled somewhere in these waters." Carter paused, letting that sink in. "The radiation from that wreck is affecting our ship. It's in the water, it's in the air, and yes, it may be causing some of you to see things that are not there." Seaman Rodriguez stood up. He was young, barely 20, with a crucifix around his neck. "Captain, with respect, I know what I saw. That wasn't a hallucination. Those were real. They were people. Dead people," another sailor added. "The K-19 crew." Carter nodded slowly. "Maybe, or maybe our minds are creating images from the radiation, from fear, from stress. I don't know. What I do know is that we're heading for the Norwegian coast at maximum speed. We'll be at Håkonsvern Naval Base in approximately 60 hours. Until then, I need every man to stay focused, stay alert, and stay together. Nobody goes anywhere alone. Understood?" A chorus of "Yes, sir" filled the room, but Carter could see the doubt in their eyes. They didn't believe him, and honestly, he didn't blame them, because he didn't believe himself either. The meeting broke up. Men filed out slowly, talking in hushed voices. Carter remained behind, staring at the empty room. The breathing sound had returned, softer now, but constant, like the ship itself had developed lungs. "Skipper?" It was Webb, lingering by the door. "You think we'll make it?" Carter looked at the young lieutenant. He wanted to lie, to offer false hope, but Webb deserved better than that. "I don't know, son. I honestly don't know." That night, though night had little meaning in the perpetual twilight of Arctic waters, Carter made his rounds through the submarine. He needed to see for himself what was happening, needed to understand. In the crew quarters, he found men sleeping in groups, afraid to be alone. Some had crosses or prayer beads clutched in their hands. Others stared at the ceiling with hollow eyes, waiting for something they couldn't name. In the engine room, he watched Morrison and his team work with grim determination. The reactor was stable, but the radiation levels were climbing, slowly but surely. In another day, maybe 2, they'd start seeing serious symptoms. In Section 4, now supposedly cleared and safe, he found Petty Officer Chen standing alone in the torpedo room. The young man was staring at the far wall where the Russian words had appeared. "Chen, what are you doing here?" Chen didn't turn around. "They're trying to tell us something, Captain. The message. It's not a threat." What? It's a warning. Chen finally looked at Carter, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. They don't want to hurt us. They want us to leave, before we end up like them. How do you know that? Because I can hear them. In my head. They're screaming, Captain. They've been screaming for 16 years, and nobody heard them, until now. Carter felt his skin crawl. Chen, you need to get some rest. I'm not crazy. Chen's voice rose. I know what you're thinking. Radiation sickness, hallucinations, whatever. But I'm telling you, they're real, and they're in pain. So much pain. Before Carter could respond, Chen collapsed, just dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Carter caught him, lowering him gently to the floor. The young man's nose was bleeding. His skin was burning with fever. Medical to Section 4, Carter shouted into his radio. Man down. Doc Harrison arrived within minutes, his medical bag in hand. He was a thin man in his 60s, with hands that never trembled even in the worst conditions. He checked Chen's vitals, his expression growing grimmer by the second. How bad? Carter asked. Acute radiation syndrome. He's in the early stages. Nausea, fever, confusion. If we don't get him proper treatment soon. Harrison didn't finish. How many others? 7 showing symptoms. Another dozen with elevated white blood cell counts. Captain, if we stay in these waters much longer, we're all going to be in Chen's position. Carter nodded. Maximum speed to Norway, whatever it takes. There's something else. Harrison pulled Carter aside, lowering his voice. Some of the men are reporting shared hallucinations. Multiple people seeing the same things at the same time. That's not how radiation sickness works. What are you saying, Doc? I'm saying maybe it's not hallucinations. Maybe there's something else going on here. Something we don't understand. Carter wanted to argue, wanted to insist on rational explanations and physical laws, but he'd seen the figures in the corridor, felt the presence, heard that breathing sound that came from everywhere and nowhere. Just keep the men alive, Doc. That's all I'm asking. Harrison nodded and returned to Chen. Carter walked back to the control room, his mind racing. They were 60 hours from safety. 60 hours of this nightmare. Could they last that long? The answer came sooner than expected. 20 hours into their journey, the sonar picked up another contact. This one was moving. Fast. Soviet attack sub, Webb reported, his voice tight. Victor class. She's pacing us, staying just out of visual range. Carter studied the sonar display. The Soviet boat was maintaining perfect distance, neither approaching nor falling back, just following, watching. Do they know we're here? Impossible to say, sir. But we're not exactly being stealthy. Not at this speed. Carter made a decision. Slow to 1/3. Cut the active sonar. Let's see what they do. The Scorpion slowed. The Soviet sub matched their pace. They're shadowing us, Morrison said. They know, but they're not attacking. Why? Nobody had an answer. For 6 hours, the two submarines played a silent game of cat and mouse. The Soviets stayed close but didn't engage, didn't hail, just followed. Then, at hour 7, everything changed. The Soviet sub began to descend. Rapidly, the sonar track showed it diving straight down, deeper and deeper, until it disappeared below the Scorpion's maximum detection range. What the hell are they doing? Webb wondered. Carter felt ice form in his stomach. They're going to the wreck, the K-19. Why would they? Webb stopped. His face went pale. Oh God, they know. They know what happened to us, and they're trying to confirm it. For 30 minutes, there was nothing. Just silence and the eternal breathing sound. Then the Soviet sub began to rise. Fast. Too fast. She's blowing ballast, the sonar tech reported. Emergency ascent. Something's wrong. Her ascent rate is unstable. Carter watched the sonar screen with growing horror. The Soviet submarine was rising at a dangerous speed, her trajectory erratic. She broke the surface less than a kilometer away. Surface communications, Carter ordered. Try to raise them. The radio operator worked his equipment. No response, sir, but I'm picking up voices. Russian voices. They're not using proper radio protocol. They're just screaming. The word hung in the air. Screaming. They went down there, Carter said quietly. They got close to the wreck, and now they're infected too. The Soviet submarine stayed on the surface for 20 minutes. Then, without warning, she began to dive again. Not a controlled dive, not a tactical maneuver. She just went down, fast and hard. The sonar tracked her descent. 300 meters, 400, 500. Then the signal disappeared. "Impact," the sonar tech said softly. She hit the bottom. Carter closed his eyes. Another crew, another tomb. How many men had just died? 50? 60? Good men, probably. Men with families. Men who'd never see sunlight again. All because of the K-19, because of radiation and death and something else. Something that had infected 2 submarines now. Something that spread like disease. "Captain," Morrison's voice was grim. "If the Soviets sent 1 boat, they'll send more. We need to get out of here. Now." Carter opened his eyes. Morrison was right. They were in Soviet waters. They'd just witnessed the destruction of a Soviet vessel. Moscow would want answers, would want blood. Maximum speed. Navigation. Plot the most direct course to Norwegian waters. I don't care if we run on the surface the whole way. The Scorpion surged forward, her engine screaming. Carter stood at the control panel, watching the depth gauge, the speed indicator, the distance counter. Every minute felt like an hour. Every mile felt like 100. Behind them, in the dark waters of the Barents Sea, 2 submarines lay dead on the ocean floor. And between them, in the twisted wreckage of the K-19, something waited. Something that had learned how to reach beyond death. Something that was patient. 40 hours later, the Scorpion limped into Håkonsvern naval base. Of the 72 men who'd entered Soviet waters, 63 came back. 9 had died en route from radiation exposure. Chen was among them. The submarine was immediately quarantined. The crew was rushed to a secure medical facility. Carter spent 3 days being debriefed by officers who didn't believe a word he said. Hallucinations, they told him. Mass hysteria induced by radiation poisoning. Shared delusions caused by stress and fear. There are no ghosts, Captain. Only radioactive isotopes and traumatized minds. Carter didn't argue. What was the point? He knew what he'd seen, what he'd felt, but he also knew that some truths were too dangerous to accept. The Scorpion was decommissioned. Officially, it was due to radiation contamination beyond safe limits. Unofficially, no crew would ever set foot on that boat again. Some said they could still hear breathing sounds coming from the sealed hull. Others reported seeing handprints appear on the external plating. Carter retired 6 months later. He moved to a small town in Montana, far from any ocean. But sometimes, late at night, he woke up gasping, feeling the cold water, seeing those empty eyes, and hearing, always hearing, that rhythmic sound. In, out, like something breathing, like something that would never stop breathing. Years later, a young naval historian contacted him. She was writing a book about Cold War submarine incidents and wanted his perspective on the Scorpion's final mission. "What really happened out there, Captain Carter?" she asked. Carter looked at her for a long time. She was young, maybe 25, bright-eyed and eager. She believed in facts and evidence and rational explanations. "We encountered radiation from a Soviet wreck," he said finally. "It affected the crew, that's all. But the reports mentioned strange occurrences, shared hallucinations, equipment malfunctions, the Soviet sub that went down after you left the area. Coincidence? Captain, please. 9 men died. 2 submarines were lost. There has to be more to the story." Carter stood up. The interview was over. "Some waters are best left unexplored, young lady. Some wrecks should stay buried. And some questions don't have answers you'd want to hear." She left, disappointed. Carter watched her go, then returned to his chair by the window. Outside, Montana stretched vast and empty. No water, no depth, no darkness. But still, in the quiet moments, he heard it. That sound, that impossible, terrible sound. The breathing of dead men who refused to die. The breathing of a ship that had become something more than steel and rivets. The breathing of secrets that the ocean would never give up. And sometimes, just sometimes, Carter looked at his reflection in the window and saw, for just a moment, handprints forming in the condensation. Small ones, large ones, reaching for him across time and space and death itself, waiting, always waiting, for the next submarine, the next crew, the next witness to the thing that sleeps beneath the Arctic ice.